Everybody in the building, put your time up right now.
My name is so excellent.
Padrino in the building.
Jehovah guide me, be my guidance, create the salvation for me. Jehovah guide me, be my guidance, know they could never stop me. I'm on the road, I'm on the road.
I don't give a fuck. Pray for my enemies, don't pray for me. Me against the world. Last man standing, I like my chance. You see me in the fight with a bear, pray for the bear. I hold this shit down by myself if I got you, group. We all we got. Lord Jesus, peace be my savior. Lord knows I got a whole lot of haters, but I dust them off. I dust them off. My mind too strong and my nine too long. I reach any pillow, you put your little mind on and I dust them off.
Salam Tanat, Aina Yistalim, Ine Ras Yadinos Tefari Neng. I am Ras Iadonis Tafari, otherwise known among the Brotherhood as Wendam Yado. Now we're going to touch on the Ethiopian Commonwealth, so let's try to get right into this. It's expansion on an earlier point and some development on this point. And it's been inspired by a recent call that we received from one of our native Ethiopian peoples in England. A sister, this is Sister Lishan, this is for you. So we haven't reasoned directly about it, but from the call and the message you left, it reminded me that we still had more to clearly articulate. So hopefully, if possible, Yah willing, we'll be able, hopefully we'll be able to more fully explicate this particular matter. First of all, when we state that Amhara is not a tribe, and it's not a tribe in the sense of Gosha, like the word Gosha. The Oromos more are a tribe in that sense. Now, when we say tribe on that level usually descended from a particular ancestor. And here we can look at the Al Kidan and at the covenant and look at, for example, Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. They were descended from a particular ancestor. Now, under Hebrew identity, ones could also call Esau, and Ishmael Hebrews, even though quite properly they are not Hebrews in the true sense of the Bible. They are Abrahamic descendants, but have not really become Hebrew. In Christ, in that sense, they can become Hebrew, they can cross over. And there's a very important background to that aspect, but we're going to stick on this point of, let us use this, actually use this marker here, and let us call this lecture the Ethiopian, right? The Ethiopian Commonwealth. This marker here is Commonwealth. Hopefully our markers will hold up. You understand? The Ethiopian Commonwealth. We'll go back and forth. So this will be the Ethiopian Commonwealth. Hope you can read it. Ethiopian Commonwealth. Now, what do we mean by Ethiopian? Now, Ethiopian may and does mean many things to many people, and we have to acknowledge that. You understand, and we're comfortable with that. You understand the fact that, recognize that fact that Ethiopian means many things to many people. And what a lot of native Ethiopians, or Ethiopians from, quote, Ethiopia don't understand is that over here in the West, we over several generations have developed our own, among those who identify with Ethiopia, our own identifications with Ethiopia that are verified and vetted by facts, and some of these facts are universal facts that does not change the fact that we are Ethiopians after 400 years in exile. This is why we usually call ourselves, and we have initiated to use this particular reference of, let's use this marker, of Falasha of the West, as Falashas of the West. So we call ourselves, this is the first and main point that we like to put forward, that we are, see if we can move this over so you can see this better, that we are Falashas of the West. Now, what does it mean for us to be Falashas of the West? I hope you can view this. Let's see if we can move this over so you can view this more circumspectly and more completely. All right, Falashas of the West. What do we mean when we call ourselves Falashas of the West? Let's get the pointer. Falashas, what does Falashas mean? Now, most times when people say Falasha, or they hear the word Falasha, they will identify, and not improperly, but we understand the modern context, they will identify the Falashas as being the Falashas of the East. Okay, here's the pointer. The Falashas of the East. But there's Falashas of the East and there's Falashas of the West. Falasha basically means one who is an exilist. You understand? One who has been, in a sense, exiled from their land. So quite rightly, we as Afro-Americans and Africans and Afro-Caribbean and Afro-Hispanics that identify with, quote, Ethiopian, and that's Ethiopian Hebrews, are those Falashas, exiles who have been in exile for more than 400 years, some say after 500 years, are still in exile in Western lands. Now, that begins the kind of connection, first of all, when we look at Ethiopia, the Ethiopic Ocean, the fact that the Southern Atlantic Ocean was known as the Ethiopic Ocean in some of the earliest writings, even of the so-called slave masters and Massa over here in the West. He also refers to us as Ethiopians and as Ethiopians. Now, others will say, well, that is just because anybody who was black, some say anyone who was black, was referred to as an Ethiopian. And therefore, the Europeans didn't know one people from the next. So that's an important point that, okay, many Europeans call any black or dark-skinned person at a certain time in history to call them Ethiopians. This means that the name Ethiopian, referring to black or so-called African people, is actually older or more authentic than the African expression. And this now verifies our initial point, that is for us, it's the Ethiopian Commonwealth. Now, many other peoples of our peoples, any man of our peoples, they like to use African, Ethiopian, Nubian, use all these different terminologies. Now, these terminologies may refer to different aspects of our people, but the most comprehensive terminology, factually and biblically based for us, is under the Ethiopian, the heading of the Ethiopian Commonwealth. Therefore, Ethiopians at home and abroad. I mean, even with Marcus Garvey, the UNIA, and others of that time, they also had squared the reality on Ethiopian as the nomenclature or naming. It's others who introduced these other terminology of whether black, colored, Negro. You understand? They stuck to the more white supremacist acceptable terminology to describe the people, because they knew that we can only go so far with just a general black identification. We have to go through too many steps if we stay in a nigger or Negro wording. So they like to use the Negro and use Negro and still use nigger a lot to kind of keep ones on the byword. And when we're on that byword, the byword is an important link into our Beta Israel or Hebraic identity. We as a particular people in the West. You understand that includes the so-called Afro-Americans, so-called African-Americans, the so-called Afro or Afro-Caribbean, the so-called Afro Hispanic, or the Hispanic people who also identify themselves as black and identify themselves as Africans and make that link. So therefore, this diaspora, with its three major, you could say, groupings of it, the so-called African American, or the North African American, the Caribbean, the ones in the island, and then the ones in the, you could say, the South, or South America, the Americas, who are part of that transatlantic, trans-Ethiopic slave trade of those who were brought over here. So once we make the identification of that this captivity and enslavement has a biblical or a scriptural and a prophetic context, that also now shows us there will be a byword that would be used instead of our name. Instead of really who we are as a people, we will lose that. Even tribal and Israelitish identification would be lost. And all this is the outworking of what is biblically called the curses. And the curses was because of disobedience of our ancestors. Because of our ancestors' disobedience. This is the scattering, you understand, to the four winds of the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, this particular group, whom I and others are members of, was scattered to the west, to the Americas, to the North Country, and to the Caribbean, the islands, and to the South, South America. Now, all that can be verified by a host of other facts. We mentioned this book before, because this is some of the background information that's important. In other words, we over here as so-called African Americans who have followed up on the research and studies probably know the histories of so-called Ethiopians at home much better, of course, than they know our history, you understand, or have really gone into some of the non-white supremacist versions or perversions, because the story of black people in America is that they were Africans taken into slavery and then went through the Civil War, and then they was niggers, and then became blacks, and then marched for civil rights and were called colored, and then, you know, comes Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, and now we have Barack Obama, and that's our history. But there's much more to it than just that. In fact, that which we just very briefly summarize is the least of really who we are as a people. You understand? I mean, this is the reason why many are probably shocked at many of us who call ourselves Hebrews or Jews and take on this identity, or reclaim rather this identity, and move with it quite easily. It becomes almost second nature. You understand? And those brothers and sisters, even the Torah studies and the Torah portion and the readings and the other feedings, many have also testified that, you know, it fits. You know what I mean? Our Judeo-Christian identity, our Ethiopian Hebrew identity, it fits without any force or without any coercion. We get it. You understand? But what some of us have not gotten just yet is this Amhara issue. And they see there's this tribalism thing that's going on. And a lot of the tribalism has been instigated. You understand? Instigated by outside forces, mainly Arab and Europeans. The Arabs, Ethiopia, as we know, Ethiopia in history has had this greatest challenges, you understand, to its identity, preservation of its identity as a nation. So when we speak of Ethiopia, we both speak of it as a nation, but moreover as an empire. You understand? So when we look at Ethiopia historically for 3,000 or so years, it is an empire, not just a nation. There are many nations, you understand, within the Ethiopian empire. So now, this now brings us, since we just identified, well, who we are, you understand? Generally speaking, the Falashas of the West, that's who we are, you understand? But now let's look at the Ethiopian picture for a moment. And let us put a couple of Ag, right, Azi, right? When we say Ag Azi, we can call it the Gu'ez. Let's get to all the markers. The Gu'ez people. The Gu'ez people. Now next we have the Tigrai, right? Next we have the Amhara, right? And next we have the Oromo. Now, of course, there are sub-tribes, so forth and so on. There are sub-tribes that we haven't listed just yet, because this is getting to know, well, who's who. Now, when we talk about the Agazi, or the Gu'iz speaking people, we're speaking very ancient. We're speaking to what the ancient Egyptians call, the ancient Egyptians know this period as what they call the first time. You understand? The first time. And so we're speaking not just 5,000 or 6,000 years. That was the late part of it. But when we speak about the high part of it, we're going back to perhaps 10,000 or 13,000 years. You understand? To this people known as the Agazi. You understand? This is like when we speak of the Agazi, in that ancient sense of purity, we're talking about Genesis chapter 1. You understand? Where man was first created in the image and after the likeness of God. That's where we're beginning when we talk about the Agazi. You understand? We see that's civilized man. That is when man and the gods, in that sense, were together as one. This is pre-Adam. One can say the Agazi, the high part of the Agazi civilization, is pre-Adam, and the lower part of it, you understand, is kind of post-Adam, and we get glimpses of it coming down into the Ethiopian, what we get to know as, generally speaking, the Ethiopian Commonwealth. Now, we have biblical names that we have been seeking to harmonize with these particular names, but now these three tribes right here make up the banner. In other words, when we look at the Ethiopian flag, although in a different order according to the colors, we have the Arungwade, the beach, and the K, or the green, yellow, and the red. Now, it's known that the Oromo color is usually green. You understand? The green. Some say that's because they were the native people who inhabited the land that we know as Ethiopia, at least in the south and some eastern regions. And being a nomadic people, a nomadic tribe, you understand, and group of other clans and tribes, they also link to a lot of other so-called African peoples that are more the Cushitic or the Hamitic. The Hamitic. Now that's important to keep in mind, that they're this Cushitic or this Hamitic people. Now, this is another demonstration that I think might help best to understand how the Tigray, the Amhara, and the Oromo work together, and why we say the Amhara properly is not a tribe in the sense of a like Gorshak. It's not a tribe in that sense. Many modern Ethiopians view themselves as a tribe because they are, in a sense, victims of, you know, this rewrite of history that white supremacy and all their scholars and bibliolators and historians and others have put out there. You understand, that has really confused the Ethiopian psyche as to who we really are. So there's this divide, kind of dividing Ethiopia along tribal lines. That's why if you look at today's Ethiopia, there's a lot of, inside Ethiopia, there's these tribal issues that, unless they're resolved, do threaten the integrity of Ethiopia. And usually we have either the Amhara against the Tigray so-called against Amhara, the Oromo against both groups of Tigray and Amhara, because the Oromos view these groups as having more in common, and in a sense they do. The Tigray and Amhara do have more in common. But let me draw this little graph right here, and this might demonstrate a little bit better how these three come together. Now the first circle, or the first cipher, right, and then we have the next circle or next cipher, and this might not be quite. Let's try it again, because it's important for us to be able to demonstrate this by a kind of an example. An example, so people can get this through this. So you have one circle, and then you have two circles, right? One circle and two circles. Now, where these two circles intersect, roughly about there, you see where these two circles intersect. So this part would equal the northern, you understand, the northern, those in the north of Ethiopia, the Tigray region, And as we said earlier, that the Queen of Sheba, you understand, the Q of S, you understand, was Tigrai. The Queen of Sheba, Queen Makeda, was Tigrai. Right now, from the south, we put an S right here, we have the Oromo people. Now, meeting in that central or more central part, both in terms of the middle of the country or the central highlands of the country, as well as meeting in a central balance among the two cultures and the cooperation between the Tigray will be more known as the Shemitic, right? The Shemitic people, right? And the Oromo might be more known as the Hamitic or the Kamites, or some would say the Kushites. They might link, and they do link more directly with the ancient idea of Kush that we have, the ancient idea of Kush coming from the first time, coming from Noah. This is why we have links with ancient Oromo civilization in ancient Egypt. And we also have links of Oromo civilization in Byzantine Rome, you understand, or amongst the black Romans. So when we talk about the black Romans and the black emperors of Byzantine, Constantinople and Byzantine, which was the early part of the Christian or the Eastern Christian Empire, we're speaking about groups of people that are linked with this general Oromo identity. Now, the question was asked was, well, how could His Majesty be Amhara if he is Oromo, or is he Oromo and not Amhara? So there's a confusion that ones have. And this is why we have to say that Amhara is neither just Shemitic from the Tigray, and is neither just Kamitic or Hamitic. They say that the Amharic language is, let's see if we can put this here, is a Kamo, right? Is a Kamo. Well, it's a little small here, but Kamo Semitic. They say that the Amhara language is Kamo or Hamo Semitic. It is Hamitic from the stock of Ham and has Cushitic in it from the Oromo, as well as Shemitic, the Shemitic or the Semitic from the Tigray. Now, both of these peoples are what we, especially as African Americans, because they say you're one drop of black blood, you're black, and we have light-skinned black people, dark-skinned black people, we have different complexions, but they're all seen within a paradigm of being black. These peoples, all of these peoples we're speaking about, are all black, from the Tigray, the Shemitic, to the Oromo, the Hamitic, the Cushitic. Now, of course, the Europeans will seek to make little nuances and say, well, this one has a nose like that and has a long face, and the other one's got a round face, and they are darker, and this one's here is a little more wavy. But that's all part of the divide and conquer. You understand, the divide and conquer strategy of white supremacy, or Willie Lynchism gone global. Willie Lynchism gone global. So when we say that the Amhara, right, speaking under the title of the Ethiopian Commonwealth, and we as the Afro-Americans or the Falashas, the exiles of the West, you understand, in viewing Ethiopian history and even so-called prehistory, we recognize the ancient Agazi or the Ge'ez roots. Now, people will say, well, what about the Ge'ez language? The Ge'ez language is much like the ancient Egyptian language, that ones would like to call it more Shemitic. They say the language is more Shemitic, but it's Hamitic. It's just in the sense it has the same blending, you understand, as the Amhara. This is why we call this the first language, because every other language today, especially Eastern language and so-called Semitic language or language of the Middle Eastern region and parts of Africa, can be deduced or linked in the ancient Agazi, in the Ge'ez. If not there, then definitely in the Amharic. In other words, as a lingua Ethiopia or lingua Africa, the Ge'ez and the Amharic, through its modified syllabary, gives us as African people a unified script. You understand, to write every African language, you understand, whether it be more so Shemitic, you understand, or more so Hamitic, but to unify the family. This is why we know the good is. We could say Noah, you understand, and Hanok and Enoch and Enos spoke Agaazi, or spoke the good is. You understand? Spoke the good is, because this is the first language. You understand? This is the first language, and it's really amazing when you study it. Ullendorf has a good book that we hope to be republishing and printing called Ethiopic Grammar. You understand? Ethiopic Grammar. The prerequisite for anyone who really is doing some home study, you understand, work, would be knowledge of the Fidels, because the book is written in English, but a lot of the examples don't always have a transliteration. So if one is more versed and recognizes the Fidels, it'll be easier for them at least to read and sound it out. But we're going to work with that book, Ethiopic Grammar, so look forward to it. It's by August Dillman, and some other older books that it's important for us as we reclaim, you understand, our identity. The next thing with our identity is language. Language is very important, not just having another way to speak, but when you study language, you're studying ways of thinking. You understand, ways of constructing ideas, ways of expression. Language is very pivotal. That's why in the whole How to Make a Slave, you understand, in the How to Make a Slave, Willie Lynch, the spell of Willie Lynchism and white supremacy to the lost sheep over here, one of the things they focused on was language, to remove from us our own language, you understand, and to give us an improper or incomplete knowledge of the new language, to keep us in a kind of a limbo, sort of a zone, like a frozen psychological state, to keep black people. And that actually is one thing that does keep black people in a frozen psychological state. You understand? They don't really get to know the language they're speaking. You understand? But know it very poorly. You understand? And use it very, how can I say, improperly, to even express our own ideas. So that leads to frustration. If the language that you're speaking, you cannot really express yourself or your real soul. This is why creative black people, those who still had their soul, were able to develop and coin unique phraseology, slang, they call it black English, whatever, but we had to carve it up, or patois, you understand, in order to express other aspects. You understand that? And speaking of patois, just on the Amharic language, the Amharic language is considered properly a patois. It's almost a patois. Now, why is that so? Because this is where the Tigrai, right? This is where the Tigrai and where the Oromo, where they met in the center, not only in the center of Ethiopia, you understand, but in a central place of culture and cohabitation and blending and becoming one. And this is why one cannot discount the Oromo, you understand, from this Ethiopian Commonwealth, even and especially vis-a-vis the whole Solomonic dynasty, the kingdom of David. I mean, the Oromo play an important role, and my reason for doing some of the videos and highlighting some of the points that I've sought to highlight is a lot of this is not taught. And of course, when we express it at first, ones will say, oh, you don't know what you're talking about, you're wrong. But try to, like we said, keep an open mind in the sense of while you still fully investigate, you understand, and you vet, you understand, all of the facts for yourself. So if you dismiss it without even going and checking it out, you're a fool. You understand? So really we don't have no business really, you know, we can end conversation right there. You understand? But if you do vet it and check it out for yourself, you understand, 9 times out of 10, you understand, with the majority of what we have also gone through, the evidence and the information, you'll find out firsthand that what we're saying is either right and exact or is more right, you understand, and maybe some points exactly you will have a difference of interpretation, but basically you'll find out the truth for yourself. This is the main thing. But if one's want to dismiss it and say, we don't know what we're talking about, this is for us. This is for us, for for the African American, the Afro American, the Afro Caribbean, the Afro Hispanic, those of us as Rastafari, as Ethiopian Hebrews, and black people over here who identify with Ethiopia, to better understand a lot of these things that we can't really fully understand from a lot of the Eurocentric writings, you understand, in and of themselves, without having a little better inside knowledge of the peoples and the culture. And it's the language that gives us that ability, you understand, through studying the language, you understand, not just using the language to impress people or whatever, but using the knowledge of the language to be able to meditate, seeing it from the people's perspective and the ancients' perspective. This is the beauty about language and the preservation of one's culture through language. Now this all will lead us to the Kubra Neges. This now leads us to the Kubra Neges. And there's a book that we mentioned before. We'll mention it once again right here. This book is by Donald N. Levine. Donald N. Levine. It's a book that we had some years ago, and one of the first of the few books of any quality, the quality of its information and the quality of its analysis, that gave us a good insight into Ethiopia, you understand, or greater Ethiopia. And the subtitle is The Evolution of a Multi-Ethnic Society. We can say a multinational society. In fact, in explaining how Amhara is not a tribe, we like to use this example. Amhara is a tribe in the same way that America is a tribe. Now, ask yourself, is America a tribe? In other words, do everybody in America belong to the same tribe? But no, they don't. They come from all different points of view. Some of them are natives over here. Others are other people who came over here. But for what? There's a certain vision, or there's a certain idea, or one can say a certain make-believe or whatever like that of America. You understand? People call it the American dream. You understand, all this idea of Americanism, and it's something that is still even developing. They still are trying to, with 9/11 and everything like that, trying to develop this American idea to become more of a magnet, you understand, for people to uphold this kind of idea of America. But America is not a tribe. But many people in other parts of the world who might be less acquainted with America firsthand, and the different peoples and the multi-ethnic, multinational sort of population that America has, would view America as a tribe. If one just heard of America, you would say, oh, that must be some tribe there. You understand? The tribe of America. But we know that America is not a tribe. In the same way we say that Amhara, the Amhara in its truest sense is not a tribe, but is rather the meeting point, as we just try to demonstrate with these two circles right here, where the south, or the southern, what we can even call the inner African push into that region by the Oromos, met with the southern moving coming from the north to south movement of population of the Shemitic population of the Tigrai. And then where these two populations met, both culturally, geographically, we can even say religiously, they came into this idea of the covenant people. You understand? They both embraced this idea, and now the northerners had the idea. The Tigray are the ones who we should credit with the whole Kubra Neges story. They are the architects, you can say, of the Ethiopian enterprise, or the Ethiopian Commonwealth. Is to the Tigray that we need to give much credit to. Even when we study the Kubra Neges and we study the authorship and the history, and that's why we say this book right here. Let's just show you the front page right here. This book right here is a good and a relevant book to get, which really kind of critically analyzes and studies many of the factors. Just to talk about some of the chapters here, where it explains. Let's see. some of the major chapters, conventional images of Ethiopia, scholarly images and assumptions, because it also clarifies a lot of scholarly assumptions that if you go read certain books written by Ethiopia or different Ethiopic topics, some of the scholars came with certain assumptions, you know, and even certain prejudices to the Ethiopian or Ethiopic claim, you understand? And then many of them sought consciously or unconsciously to undermine that. And in other words, to sow weeds among the wheat of that particular harvest of God. In other words, Ethiopia, God has had a focus on those people. So what brings all these peoples together, whether the Oromo, the Amhara, Tigrai, you understand, together in this Ethiopian and ancient commonwealth, you understand, that many have sought to disparage by putting out false information, you understand, concerning some sort of continual period of like the Tigray and Amharas oppressing the Oromo. You understand? This is the idea that has been put out and was used especially by the Darug, the communists, the socialists, Mengistu. He used that tribe on tribe to solidify his own power. You understand? There's a lot of lies that have been circulated against His Imperial Majesty, while from a more balanced and factually evidence and correct perspective, it's the reign of His Majesty that really helped to equalize and bring more of the people to a fair playing level. And he was opposed, you understand, on all sides. He was opposed by the Amhara, you understand, even though he is an Amhara. But what is an Amhara? An Amhara is a sultane. Let us put this up there while we still have time. The Amhara, you understand, so we'll call this, let's see if we can do this like, okay, this thing is not writing so well. All right, a sultane. This part that's missing right there is a sultane. The Amhara is a sultane. It's a civilization. You understand? It's a certain, you can call it worldview. You understand? It's a certain religious or spiritual covenant idea that has a spiritual aspect. You understand?